Hello. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar on how to conduct culinary quality evaluations of vegetable breeding lines. I'm your host, Alice Formiga of eOrganic. The presentation will last about 45 minutes, and then we'll have 30 minutes for audience questions. So today, I'm very pleased to welcome Lane Selman and Jordyn Bunting of Oregon State University. Lane is an assistant professor of practice in the Department of Horticulture, and she's also the founder of the Culinary Breeding Network, supporting plant breeders and culinary professionals in developing and evaluating crop varieties with a strong focus on flavor, quality, and market relevance. Jordyn is a faculty research assistant and food scientist on the product and process development team at Oregon State University Food Innovation Center in Portland, Oregon. So with that, I'm just going to turn off my video and hand it over to you, Jordyn.
All right. All right. Thank you, Alice. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'll just jump right into it. So just a brief background, like where I work, if people are familiar or heard about the Food Innovation Center. But it is part of Oregon State University. So I work there. It is off site. So we are in Portland. So Oregon State has many ag experiment stations throughout the state. This one is the one in Portland, focusing on serving not just the Portland metro area, but even like national audience in terms of food industry consulting, helping people bring their ideas to market, safe production practices. But we have multiple teams. I'm on the product development team. So it is a lot of consulting work, helping people formulate products to get things to market. But we also have a food safety team. They do a lot of research, especially in Listeria monocytogenes, and they do a lot of educational workshops. But we also have a sensory science team that also helps out industry in doing sensory studies. Um, but jumping into it, I've also, through this work, I've worked closely with Lane, so Culinary Breeding Network. And for this project, we teamed up on evaluating tomato lines, but I'll let Lane talk about Culinary Breeding Network, give you some more background with that.
Thanks, Jordan. Hi, everyone. I'm Lane. As Alice and Jordan told you, I work at Oregon State University, where I have been working for 20 years on various projects. About 15 years ago, I started this initiative called the Culinary Breeding Network because I saw that there was a gap between the plant breeders I was working with that were becoming more connected with the farmers that they were serving through participatory breeding. But there was not kind of the extension to those that were actually utilizing these crops in the end. Whether that is a chef or a baker using, barley, or a chef using, tomatoes, or like a hot sauce company using the peppers that the breeders were breeding, right? So really, at that point, I started creating these opportunities for more connection and community building between plant breeders, seed growers, farmers, retailers, distributors, culinary professionals, value added producers, and other stakeholders, like just the general public and eaters, to improve the quality, meaning also flavor and performance in the kitchen, because we were doing a lot for vegetables, grains, fruits, nuts. Like, I didn't list all these things, but now I'm working on all these different crops. But we were evaluating all these different breeding lines on actual farms. But then once we had the product that was harvested, it's like, well, what do we do now? How are we going to evaluate for flavor? And at one point, I was told, hey, just take a bite of it. If it's something you could eat raw, like a tomato or a pepper, and give it a 1 to 5 or 1 to 9. And I thought, who am I to do this, right? So that's when I kind of got into creating these opportunities for breeders to be more in contact with culinary professionals so that they could be actually doing these evaluations together with them. Go to the next slide real quick, Jordyn. So a little bit more about the Culinary Breeding Network and how it works is I work on a lot of different grant-funded projects. A lot of them are OREIs, which are the Organic Research and Education Initiative out of USDA. And so they're usually really large research projects, and some of these are listed here, like more bang for your buckwheat, the Naked Barley project, value-added grains. These are all grain and pseudo grains, but I also work on this Tomi project, and I've worked on winter vegetables, and so these might be something that have a lot of breeding, a lot of research, a lot of education, but I am taking the lead, doing all of the outreach. And it's also like community building for them, putting them in contact with culinary professionals and end users that they might not have contact with. Doing a lot of engagement with events I'm not going to talk about today, but in like also like developing marketing campaigns so that they look at this. These all look really beautiful. I work with artists to kind of make them sexier, more exciting, and more like kind of enticing for the general public to want to know more about buckwheat or barley, let's say. So go ahead and go to the next one. So I am not a sensory scientist. My background is in agronomy and entomology, and I work with plant breeders quite a bit now. But I was in these projects and I was like thrown into, okay, I was told like, hey, why don't you just I'm evaluating all these trials out in the field, but I was like, now I got to evaluate them in the kitchen. So I was leaning on chefs that I knew from working at the farmers market. And I said, okay, like for instance, these are beets, obviously. So we're like, okay, let's taste them raw, let's taste them cooked. And I started just kind of on my own without knowing very much. Let me just have people and mostly chefs taste them. Go ahead to the next slide. And so a lot of ways, so there's two different ways that I have done this before. And that's like the descriptive type of tastings versus the preference evaluations. The descriptive meaning, and these have been really powerful, right? Where I oftentimes lean on chefs to like write a flavor description, which you would use in like a seed catalog. Like this pepper has these flavor notes and it's best used in this way. And so these descriptive ones that tell like the qualities of the particular variety or breeding line so that they can, like differentiate between different, like this was winter squash, right? So we did this with winter squash, versus the preference or hedonic, where your evaluations, where evaluators are just like telling you their how much they like something from like with a 1 to 9 or a 1 to 5 scale, right? And so I'm going to show you a couple of next one ballots that I've used in the past. Let's see, the one with the peppers, let's take a look at that one. And really, this was the first one I ever did where I was like, okay, I want them to evaluate on appearance, flavor, sweetness. This is far too many things for a common human to evaluate for, by the way. But I was having chefs do this and they were evaluating and giving us this like 1 to 9 kind of scale for preference. In the middle, there's another one with basil. I'm just going to go through these quickly because we want to get to like how we actually are to do these that Jordyn has done for me. But this is kind of like the way that I have gone about trying to assess different breeding lines and varieties, mostly because my I'm not, a lot of times I'm not writing peer-reviewed journal articles for these types of things. I'm basically reporting back to farmers and to the breeders, just, like high level, like this is what people like, this is what they don't like. And then on the far left, this is a tomato flavor wheel kind of activity that we did. If anyone is interested in these, I can, email you like these types of ballots that we've created to kind of try to get to the end of just like I said, like the information that we want to share back to the breeders and also back to the farmers. So go ahead to the next one. One thing that I did that farmers actually asked me for and really wanted was a flavor wheel. So you might be familiar with flavor wheels for like wine, and other other crops that people like get really into really being able to describe the flavors that they are sensing when they taste something. And so I was working on this project with winter squash to try to get consumers more excited about winter squash in general. And there's a lot of different winter squash, and some store longer. And we were really wanting to put a lot more emphasis on long storing winter squash so that farmers would have more to sell in the wintertime. And so we were trying to come up with kind of like these flavor descriptions that could be utilized in seed catalogs or by farmers that were selling the winter squash to differentiate like when you would use one versus the other and the flavor notes of them. So this was a convening that I did to create this wheel. And I actually invited just chefs that are actively, active chefs that have gone through a culinary school, people that do coffee roasting and coffee tasting, and also wine roasting and tasting. They are individuals that have the type of language, they have the words they've developed. So we're developing a lexicon for a specific crop. And so that's what we did collectively together. And you can go to the next slide. This is the last one I'll share with you, but this is the winter squash flavor wheel. And we tasted the squash, you might have noticed in the last slide, pureed like steamed and pureed, and then also raw. And so we captured the lexicon, the words that people were using most commonly to describe what they were sensing. So that is a kind of a community developed winter squash wheel. And then on the left hand side, we have a flavor wheel that a chef came up with for tomatoes. And so he got a little. This is pretty advanced flavor wheel. It has some flavors that some people might be like, I actually don't even know what that means. Or I don't know what that tastes like, you know? So this is super cool for like next level. Jordyn is actually, I don't have it done yet by the artist yet, but he's created a tomato flavor wheel from the activity that we went through that he's going to share with you now. And I'll just say that I'm working on a project that's called Tomi. He's going to introduce it a little bit, and this is organic tomato breeding project that happens led out of Purdue, but Oregon State University is part of. And we wanted to, it's disease resistance in round, red, slicer type tomatoes. And we want to evaluate the breeding lines for flavor. And texture. And so I asked Jordyn at the Food Innovation Center. Jordyn and I have worked on barley, and we've worked together many years. And he's an incredible taster and scientist. So I'm so excited to have him to kind of take the lead on this and do it in a more formalized way as a sensory scientist and evaluate these. I think he's going to tell you, but I think we had 8 to 12 different breeding lines that we evaluated so that we could get back to the breeders and say, these are the ones that we think taste really great, and these are the ones that maybe are not that great. So they can pair that up with how they're performing in the field and decide which ones they're going to move forward with. So I'll go ahead and let Jordyn take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that was great. I mean, you introduced like a ton of background on like everything that can be encompassed in sensory. Um, but yeah, so this presentation is largely focused on tomatoes, but I do want to present this as more of like a general framework to apply to really any crop that you might be evaluating. And Lane talked a lot about there's many pros and cons of what sensory tests you do. She was saying like with some of the tests, you would never do any of these things with the average person. How I would go about things with chefs is dramatically different than if I were talking to like students. So no, that's all helpful context, but just some brief background on this Tomi project. So yeah, ultimately this is about breeding better tomatoes. So factoring in the disease resistance, tailoring it to different regions, improving the natural disease control, and even just building decision-making tools and building networks between farmers and researchers and chefs sharing knowledge. But a core part of this is to breed better tomatoes. You are trying to grow delicious tomatoes in addition to disease resistance. And so prioritizing the delicious part, I think this is something we can kind of all relate to. I think tomatoes is like the perfect example of this, where you have all these really delicate um, tomato varieties that can spoil easily. They don't ship well. They are only available certain times of the year, but they tend to be very, very flavorful. as opposed to these other tomatoes that it's like you go into a grocery store in the winter, regardless of where you are in the country, and you find these less vibrant tomatoes. It's like, yes, you can still get tomatoes, but I think we've all experienced biting into one of these tomatoes and comparing it to our other experience with tomatoes, and the flavor is drastically different. So trying to factor in, okay, if you don't breed for flavor or actually take the time to evaluate flavor, that can get lost over time. If you're prioritizing agronomic data and yield, disease resistance, all of that is important. But if you don't put an active effort into evaluating flavor, it will get lost with time. And so just generally, like why quality evaluations matter. So you are ultimately seeking out, okay, well, what qualities of your crop are desirable? Can I breed for these qualities, or are these environmentally driven? How can I actually quantify these qualities? Can they be practical to like, I want quantifiable data, but I want it to be easy to measure or inexpensive. So you have lots of different options depending on your crop. I'll talk a lot about bricks today. So this is just a general measure of like sweetness, how much sugar is dissolved in a liquid. But then there's many other qualities that apply to whether you're doing grains is going to be dramatically different than what you would do for tomatoes. But ultimately, they all come down to there's going to be some sort of quantifiable measurement that you can relate to a quality that can serve as like a checkpoint for your breeding trials. Um, Also, you can also develop a shared lexicon. So Lane did talk about lexicon. So there's with sensory, there's multiple levels to this. It's all a matter of okay, how much time and how much money are you willing to spend on doing these kinds of things? So the World Coffee Research Organization, they have this, it's available free. You can download this resource online where they have developed this flavor wheel. But this is, there, there's developing a flavor wheel, but then there's another level to it in sensory, we'll call it descriptive analysis, to where instead of like I'm measuring pH, I'm measuring bricks of a tomato or a plant. Like you're using some sort of instrument to quantify things, but with descriptive analysis, you are training humans to become analytical equipment. In order to do that, that takes an enormous amount of time and money. So I point people to the coffee research one because you can download this online and they are very precise. When they say this has notes of whiskey, cherry, it has acetic acid notes, it has notes of hazelnut, you can look up what exactly they define every single one of those as. Because then you can train people all on the same lexicon to say, okay, when I say, here's an example, when you say peach, what do you actually mean? They have reference standards, so fresh peach pit. This is an intensity on a 0 to 15 point scale of 8. And then they tell you how you prepare it. You put a peach pit like in a little container, put a cover over it. You smell that. That is now everyone's standard of what a level 8 is. They also had another Jello peach, just the dry powder. To them, flavor-wise, that is a level 7 on this scale. So I tend to point people to that coffee one because it has like a nice sensory lexicon that's defi you can define it, you can train people on it, but it's again, it's just a matter of how much time and money are you willing to train everyone to do this because it is an intense methodology. But yeah, that's descriptive analysis, and we're taking flavor wheels to like the next level. But some other general methods, I mean, Lane covered these well, but you have some rapid methods. So generally with like rapid methods, you can do larger numbers of people. They don't have to be trained like you would descriptive analysis. Like that's like the most intense level of training. Um, you can use untrained panelists and then hedonic. Lane also mentioned this. So this is just telling people how much do you like this? Or if you're doing difference, can you tell the difference between two samples just to really see, are people just guessing? Is there a significant difference? Some other terms you might hear, kata or rata or jar. So check all that apply test where you have like a list of options. I will show an example of this as well. You have a list of options where you just check like, oh, I tasted notes of this, this, and this, and everyone just checks what they're experiencing. Just about right is like, oh, okay, this is the perfect level of sweetness. Oh, this is not sweet enough. This is too sweet. So you can ask questions about that on ballots. And with rapid methods, it's fast. You can run it repeatedly, but you're limited based on like precise diagnostic information. And your results are going to vary. Like if you do the same exact panel to like a group of college students versus chefs, everyone's tasting the same thing, but their results are going to be dramatically different. So you kind of have to be aware of that. And then I'm not going to focus much on this guided descriptive tasting because I've kind of talked a lot about descriptive analysis, but the pros of this is incredibly rich detail, but the cons very time and resource intensive. Some other general test types. So like it's again audience specific. So you have consumer tests. So you can do rapid tests on untrained panelists, and then you're getting insight on like broader market acceptability. Like if you were bringing this into like a wider market and you just want general public opinion. So consumer tests are good for that. But you're using tons of people. Some like here at my work, sometimes these panelists, like we have over 100 of them coming in for taste tests, and you do have to pay people for their time, and so there's a high cost to that. Or you're doing these types of tests, like I know Lane has done, like really like high throughput, like rapid tests. You can do it at field days, just people coming to your field for like if you're showcasing your research or your plants or people on your team. But it's important to have really large sample sizes. Um, but then you also have like on the other side of the spectrum, like maybe you don't want the general public's opinion, you want some very specific feedback, like application wise. So this is useful for crops where like, okay, I'm breeding tomatoes for sauce. And so like I'm only going to evaluate based on the application. So I'm going to have a standardized recipe that's applied to all of my lines. And then you evaluate with culinary professionals, like they'll give you feedback where like the average person didn't really think about like, oh, like how much waste does this bell pepper have if the shoulders are too large and the stem sunken in? Like, does that produce more waste? Like they gonna have like really specific feedback on just like, yeah, the crop shape to reduce waste or just the ease of cutting and prepping. So there are some every test or every option you do is going to have pros and cons. But just generally, like what we ended up doing. So I will for some, I guess, added context with sensory, like I've said, there's it's all time and resource dependent on what you're given. On for some sensory, there and or research that's going to be published, like they might be investing over 20,000, maybe even up to $50,000 worth of money into this research, where what we did was just working with the budget we had. So this is like a quicker version and with like a more targeted audience for what we were looking for. But again, there's just spectrums to what sensory research entails. But the first step always, regardless of your crop, just doing research on the crop to like identifying, okay, what are the traits and qualities I need to identify, to quantify, to ask people about. So it's really helpful just to do a broad search online. These are just some headlines of the articles that I was looking at, just to see, okay, what has already been done? What are people screening for? In order to help me develop my survey. But the next step, like I said, recruit your panel carefully. In ours, we had a mixture of food scientists, some chefs, and just general professionals in the food industry who have worked in food throughout a large chunk of their life. And so knowing that was going to be my panel, I I knew that the types of questions I'd be comfortable asking them, and like I would never have done anything that I'm about to show with untrained like younger students who are like new to this because it would be massively overwhelming. Um, let's see. Some just general serving logistics, things I had to think through. Tomato flavor can weaken or degrade if if they were refrigerated. And so this timing of this was very challenging of like because it gets very difficult to try to match ripeness and you just have to try to do your best and making sure you have enough crop all at the same time, making sure the crop can get to you in time, and then scheduling this out, making sure some tomatoes aren't rotting, and we taste only the all the tomatoes that are in the general, I guess, peak of ripeness, just so everything is just being evaluated equivalently. And then how samples were presented. So we had one tomato, at least one that will be left whole, so you can evaluate the appearance of a whole one. You have one that's been cut in half, so you can see both halves and then judge the appearance of the interior. And then you have multiple chopped, and ideally you would want to mix the chopped ones together because you don't want to base all your results on just a single tomato that you tasted. And it's important to keep in mind that we're only doing raw tasting because these tomatoes were bred as slicer tomatoes. Slicer, everything that's meant to be consumed raw. So that's why we chose this format. I wouldn't have done this if I was evaluating like tomatoes that are meant for sauce. Here's an example of some blind codes. So on the left-hand side, we had the variety name. And then in Excel, you can do like a random number generator, and that just assign 3-digit codes. It's good to have 3 digits. I mean, if one was just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, we think that doesn't bias us, but on some level, humans, we want to apply patterns and make sense of patterns as much as possible. And some of us have feelings on like the number 7 for whatever reason. So it's good to have neutral 3-digit codes where nothing makes sense. You can't really have feelings about them. It's really good for that for sensory. Some general testing logistics. So, like I said, the timing and the rightness was challenging, but we made it work. You just do the best you could. We decided to do consensus scoring. So I'll talk more about this, but essentially, instead of everyone taking their own survey, we evaluated as a group and came up with a consensus to give a single score. Just because we were going through so many different traits, it really helped us align on like, okay, well, when I say umami, like what do I mean? Can we all collectively agree on what these things are? Because if that stuff isn't figured out in the beginning, you can have potentially really noisy data. And we weren't going to spend a lot of time training people in advance. Like this was just like a one and done kind of tasting. So we took more time on getting to the alignment and developing the consensus score rather than training everyone in advance for like many hours in advance. So that was why we did consensus scoring. But there are cons to this. Um, as humans, I think we want to agree and come to a consensus and not be difficult like in a group setting. And so there are some cons that people may actually hide their true feelings when doing this. I think as a group, we all knew each other pretty well, so I want to believe that wasn't the case, but just something to keep in mind if you do go about this. And we ended up doing 11 breeding lines, and that took about 3 hours, where the first breeding line took about 1 hour, just talking through everything and aligning. So can call this like a calibration round. You can even do this like on a test tomato or whatever vegetable you might be evaluating, just so everyone agrees on the definitions of things and how to go about this. And then at the end, please, everyone can ask me questions. But overall qualities that we were judging. So, like Lane was mentioning, appearance, taste, flavor profile, texture, and our overall impression, or what we'll call like hedonic, overall hedonic. And we had some quantitative measures because I always like mixing in some analytical just to really ground me there. So we did pH and bricks. We can talk more about there's trade-offs on these. Like there's some tests are better than others, but some are easier than others. And then we did a blend of question types. So some were very descriptive in trying to make a flavor wheel. Some were focused on purely hedonic, like do you like something? Some things were rating the intensity, and we have some anchor references I'll show. And I mentioned kata before, the check all that apply. We also had questions. So, and everyone is welcome to use this questionnaire. I shared it with Alice, and you're free to use it as a reference. But we'll just start walking through some of the questions I was asking. So starting out with appearance. So we had people describe the shape, describe the color, how much do you like it? Here is a rate the intensity of kind of example. And with the numbers, you want to like define like, okay, when I say like what the middle of the scale is and what the two ends are, and then we just rated each little um, thing on that. We did a 0 to 10 scale. 1 to 9 is also a very more common scale. But this is an example of just the appearance attributes of like what we were evaluating when we cut the tomato in half. In terms of taste, same, another rate the intensity kind of question. This is what they look like. For taste, we like on the fly, I ended up making this like 0.2% MSG solution. And so this is really just to show people, okay, when I say umami, like this is what I mean, and this is like the sensation we are looking for. I didn't do it in the actual tasting with sugar and a citric acid solution, but it would be very helpful, even showing people a spectrum of what this is, like low sweetness, mid, high. And these numbers, I'm just looking up online, like typical bricks of a tomato, and then I'll make that percent as a sugar solution. And then you can do the same thing with citric acid. That's the primary acid in tomatoes. And so it's really helpful to have a spectrum like, oh, okay, this is what a really sour tomato is going to feel like in my mouth, and this is what like a not so sour one would. So it is good to have some potential reference standards to like show people this is what these tastes should taste like. And then flavor. So this is an example of kata where you list different attributes and then you ask them, okay, what are you noticing? Check all that apply. And then if there was added notes, I just have like a box for people to put all their opinions. And this is actually what I'm using from this audience to generate the ideas or the initial like rough draft of a flavor wheel. But then we also ask, okay, like in addition to flavor notes, like how intense is this flavor? Is it like to the point of it's almost overwhelming and like off-putting, or is it just generally flavorful, bland, so on? But again, you are showing people like what anchors are we using on this scale. So we're all in alignment. You can easily, I could have done like a 1 to 5 scale as well here, looking back on it. It really just depends like how much resolution you want in your scale. It's just trial and error with figuring this stuff out. Texture. So this was very important uh, for tomatoes. There might be some redundancy in here, and I probably wouldn't do all of these again, but this all came from the literature I was reading on. People are measuring mealiness, juiciness, meltiness, firmness, skin thickness, and then just overall, again, hedonic. I'm not going to go through all the texture references, but this one was very important for having anchor references. Because like when I say moderately mealy, like what does that mean? So we were just getting examples. So moderately mealy, baked apple, it's what do we say? Yeah, soft, it's juicy, but it has kind of a grainy breakdown. And then you just show the other ends of the scales where, okay, fresh watermelon, just pure juice, zero graininess at all. To the other side of the spectrum, like a bean or a chickpea, chalky, powdery in the mouth. So just again, training everyone to be like on the same page. Similarly, we had anchor references for firmness, where on one end, ripe banana to like hard candy. And then at the end, overall impression. So this, now we are factoring in, okay, given all that you've experienced with appearance, flavor, and texture, what is everything you've noticed about this tomato? And then describe any other unique features. So just again, giving them some added uh, info to help us conclude, okay, the overall takeaway on this tomato and like what comments weren't even featured on the survey, but you want people to know. Then after all that came down, it's time to analyze the data. Uh, Lots of different ways of going about this. I'm not sure exactly what Lane has done in the past, but I mean, a lot of people do paper ballots and you can just tally up everything on the end, do some basic statistics. You can record the data directly into Excel. Personally, being part of Oregon State, we have access to Qualtrics, so that's what my survey was done through, and you can do some basic statistics through Qualtrics. But Excel's pretty good for basics, and there's lots of online tutorials. Um, Honestly, AI, ChatGPT is surprisingly very, very good, especially if you have zero statistics background. I found it to be really, it matched a lot of like what I was doing. And I personally, I use Jump, so JMP, and I ended up developing, we'll call them radar charts. Sometimes people may call them spider plots or like a similar kind of term, but I will show some examples. So this is for one of the tomatoes. So yeah, this is a radar plot or a spider plot. And this is just like a general, I guess, map of like this is everything we experience in this tomato. I didn't choose all of the traits because some just wasn't that relevant or like everything was kind of about the same or no one really even commented on it. So like seed quality stuff, like I asked for like seed size and seed quantity. Like it just wasn't really that important. It was just statistical noise at the end. Some traits are like highly correlated or negatively correlated, like firmness and meltiness. And then I removed pH because in reality, titratable acidity is a better measurement for sourness, where pH is just it's a measure of acidity, but it's not related to how we perceive sourness. So that would actually be a better indicator for acidity. I just didn't have the equipment on hand to measure it, but I had a pH meter, so that's why I chose that. Um, and then summarizing, so the graph on the left, so we have the top four lines. Also part of the questionnaire, or at the end, I had people tally up, okay, what was your favorite tomato? And then I chose the top four that got the most votes. And then you can see the ones that were all favored, they all kind of really align pretty well. You have, of course, like awesome, great flavor, moderately to intense levels of flavor, but you'll see like sweetness kind of varies, acidity varies, umami varies, but what is very important, they all have very low mealiness, very like mid to low firmness, middle of the range juiciness to meltiness. So texture was incredibly important for people's overall preferences. And you'll see like the bottom seven uh, kind of all over the place, but you'll notice that it's really the texture traits that really drive the overall hedonic, where mealiness was like the worst thing. But there were a couple of varieties where they had intense flavor, but the flavor profile they had was funky. And people just like weren't that into it. So it did capture some unique things there. And then, like I mentioned with the Kata on the flavor wheel. So this is just taking directly from my survey from the flavor kata. So this is like all the boxes people were checking for every variety. So I looked at those as like the dominant kind of categories. And then I had people add in their additional comments. Like, okay, like someone said this kind of tastes like a Whopper. It was a very meaty tasting tomato. Some were more specifics, like these things kind of tasted like dirt, or this had like a hint of a penny and tin, like metallic kind of flavor came out. Some were like seaweed, oceanic. So just giving some people a room to make comments on what flavors they were perceiving. And then this is now being worked into a flavor wheel that we're currently in progress on. But again, like I'm doing much more research in addition to these notes. I'm also looking at other flavor wheels like lexicon, like especially from that coffee one. What else has been done in the tomato space, looking at papers on flavor chemistry in tomatoes. What are the primary components? What are the flavor notes of those individual chemicals? Kind of building that research into our flavor wheel as well. And then at the end, so I'm just displaying like the top four of people's favorite varieties. But just the general comments you get from people working in food, like some of these comments are like hyper specific that I would not expect this level of detail from someone who didn't work in food. So some people were saying like this is the ideal BLT tomato, or some comments were like, oh, this is like a perfect salad tomato because the juice just really comes out and makes like a really flavorful vinaigrette. So you can get some unique comments dependent on the audience that you have involved. But then I am going to open it up for questions. And yeah, thank you all. I know it's a lot, so please ask away.
Okay, that was great, Jordyn. Thanks so much for that. Lane, if you want to come on as well, you can join us, and we can all have our videos on during the Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box, and we'll be glad to just read them out loud and answer them. So here's a question. How to best cut a slicer tomato for representative samples? That's a great question because it might just fall apart.
Yeah, I mean, here, like on that, in this picture on the left, like you can really see like how we exactly cut them. And like it was just like chunks. Um, but then it was like if you cut multiple, you can toss them all together and then you just display the chunks. And then it's really just people like you don't have to have like perfect slices. Like it doesn't need to be presented in that way. But it really we were just serving chunks, keeping in mind we're going to be tasting a lot of tomatoes and like we don't want people getting like palate fatigue and being too full. So just keeping that in mind, but really just a chunk of multiple tomatoes mixed together.
But you did do, right? We did do them like crosswise through the middle for like the appearance ones, right? You had like a whole one and then you cut them crosswise, not lengthwise, and then set them out so that we could kind of see and we evaluated the appearance based on that, right?
Yeah, you do want an appearance of what a slice would be.
Mhm.
And like that's like that was very important for measuring pulpiness. Like I had a specific definition for pulpiness. I forget what it was. It was like the ratio of it was an anatomical term, the pericarp.
Mhm.
But yeah, so you do want an example of what a good slice would look like, but for tasting, we were just doing chunks.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because, if you had some other tomato that was used for a different purpose, you might be looking at completely different characteristics, like some
Oh yeah, like
recipes. Yeah,
I wouldn't have done this for sauce or
right.
paste tomatoes. Yeah.
Right. And then some recipes call for tomatoes where you scrape out the seeds, so they don't necessarily want a whole
Yeah.
lot of pulp and that kind of thing. So it's really
Yeah.
specific 'cause there's so many different types of tomatoes for so many different kinds of culinary uses. So,
I know
um,
there's yeah, tomatoes are a really good example because you can have one crop used tons of different ways.
I do
okay.
want to say that I did pop into here an eOrganic article called Simple Methods for Market Growers to Assess Culinary Quality with Consumers that was written a few years ago by myself and Julie Dawson, who's at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who is part of the TOMI project and does a lot of flavor work with chefs and with farmers. And there are some ways of doing these hedonic and kind of preference, descriptive tastings that are like very simple to use because I saw Jeannie's next one is like at a farmer's market. And so I think that there's some good examples in there to use for these more yeah, just like for the engaging the general public and doing some tastings.
Okay, here's another question, and this is an interesting one, because the TOMI project was a multi-state project, and so we have a question about how different are these evaluations with different soils or grown in different climates. So, were all these tomatoes in this evaluation grown here in Oregon, or did you have these shipped from some of the other states where that were part of the TOMI project?
Yeah, so this was just the Oregon one. But yeah, ideally, this would be repeated at every institution and yeah, in the same way. Like that would be ideal. This was just like the first one. It was just like a opportunity that came up here. But yes, ideally this type of method would be applied everywhere, and then the results would be shared. And everyone ideally would be working from the same lexicon.
Mhm.
Yeah, that would be good because certainly, the climate here for growing tomatoes is very different than a lot of the other
Yeah.
states. We don't get as warm nights, so the flavor can be less intense here for sure, or it can be watery and, all different
Yeah,
variables.
it can definitely have like a major impact. Um,
So what is the maximum number of samples for something like a farmer's market taste test in your experience?
oh man, I mean Lane might have more experience. I think
Mm.
11 would be too many. I
I feel
mean,
like we often do like six.
yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say maybe less than five.
I mean,
Yeah.
chefs can do, if you're working with professionals, they can do more because they just don't get the same type of palate fatigue as we do. But I feel like we try to keep it at six when we're doing, even at like field days and that type of thing. So, and Jeannie asked about that, I think, or somebody about, but it's like if you're at a farmer's market where with our field days, we kind of in these projects, we'll like, if there's something that's out in the field that's just not performing well or it's like very disease, it's just not for field reasons, it's not going to be like something viable. It's like let's don't even include, let's eliminate it. So it's like the most promising lines we're going to put into that, so we try to minimize it as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we have a couple questions about what you can do to fight palate fatigue, whether there's a limit or a number or time limit for tasting, and whether there's something that people can eat between tomato varieties to cleanse the palate.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of opinions on this. I mean, with this, I wasn't really worried about based on like our panel that we were using, like people who were really experienced, and we were kind of taking our time between samples because it's like we're looking at things, we're just focusing, taking a bite, focusing just on taste, taking a bite, focusing just on texture, taking a bite, focusing just on flavor profile. And there would be like downtime between like switching from one variety to the next. So there's like gaps built in. But if you were just doing like 11 different tomatoes like back to back, like a lot of the differences like you wouldn't really pick up on, and that's overwhelming. So you need gaps of time. 11 varieties for the average person, probably way overwhelming. This took us 3 hours. I wouldn't say there's like an exact, like, not that I know of, like a precise number you're limited to. really just like trial and error experience, getting feedback from the people doing the tasting. And then in terms of like palate cleansers, when like I worked in like wine sensory for a bit, and like the go-to was yeah, saltine crackers, like unsalted. Just like it really like absorbs it really just sucks out all moisture and just like a very neutral flavor profile. But some people say the saltines don't really help them that much. It is like a nice gap that it gives you like in time between samples. But I also hear very good things about sparkling water.
Mhm.
I hear is a good one. Not flavored sparkling water, just like neutral sparkling water is another common one.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So I thought it was really interesting when you talked about the emotional aspect of the sensory tasting. For example, people might have feelings about the number seven, or
Yes,
whether
it is very
whether they
true.
yeah, or whether they might change their opinion within the group and neglect their own feelings, or they need to feel comfortable within the group. And Janine asked another question about whether there's any benefit to replicating any samples within the same test. Because I was wondering, for example, like, do people have an emotional bias, pro or con, towards the first one that they taste, or anything like that? So, is there a
Oh
benefit to
yeah.
repeating within the same test?
Yeah, totally. It's just again a matter of if you are repeating, then you're just possibly at least doubling the amount of samples you have to taste. When we tasted this, a lot of us, like especially at the end when we were tallying up our favorites, like we did revisit um some that were like that we wanted a second opinion on. So we had opportunities to revisit to like check, like, okay, is this what we think it is? Having it done like in a systematic way, it's like that would have been more challenging on our end for palate fatigue. That would have been a lot more samples. But yes, in general, I will say it is definitely good to revisit and even collect data on when people went back, because maybe now people's opinions are just changing now that they've seen the
Mhm.
range of flavors when they go back to it. Now they come at it with like I like this one as a number five, but given that I've tasted everything else, I actually think this should be a seven. So like that definitely can happen.
We've done it also where we give people different ballots, and so their ballots are in different orders. So it's all set up, and then all the different stations, and then it's like, and then we're forcing people not to start with sample one. So if this was something where it was different than what Jordan and I did with his tomatoes, but we had it all set up and say like it's peppers or whatever, and then your ballot starts at 2:12, and the next person's ballot starts at 9:16 or something. And so it's forcing people to go in a different order. So, because yes, the first one is always going to be wonky, I think. And then, yeah, Janine said, yes, I also have done it too with the barley tastings where we would sneak in just maybe one of them duplicated and just see like how it changed and if people like rated it the same or different. A couple of other things that I have also done to kind of minimize distraction, but also like basic, like biases is giving people earplugs. So there's like, I mean, this is a completely different thing that Jordan and I did with this one, but it's like to minimize any other kind of distraction. So give people earplugs so there's no noise, and then also making sure that you're doing it in a place where there's no other like smells as much as possible, and just like no other kind of like sensory noise that's happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, so yeah, like Lane with that question, like putting in like a replicate or something, like that does it's very useful for like with Lane's method, rapid methods with like much larger number of groups of people. And then this was consensus scoring, so it was like it's definitely different with what we did here versus like what you would do with more rapid methods and screening more people. Like I think you can embed replicates or just like the one kind of just repeat one just to see if there was a difference. I think it's easier with more like rapid methods rather than consensus scoring, us talking like really in depth on every quality. Like this was just a different kind of design.
I want to say one thing too is like I think that like there's really very different, obviously there's very different methods that you would use. Like you're not going to have earplugs if you're doing it at the farmer's market or a field day or something like this typically. And so I feel like there's like publishing in a peer-reviewed journal article, you run statistics, all these things, right? As a pure like actual sensory scientist activity. Other things are like what I have been doing, which is just like just getting very fat, like not having the budget, doing it rapid and just making it up as you go, but has a lot of value though. Like a lot of these, I do a lot of organize a lot of events that show like different varieties at a table that people get the opportunity to taste, and the breeder is standing there. So they're not collecting actual data and not having people fill out ballots, but because they're standing there and people are tasting, and that maybe there are some of these are really big events where maybe they engage with 300 people in a day, in an evening. And if they hear the same thing over and over and over, I mean, you don't have to have statistics to say, like, this is what people are liking. This is what we're going towards. So that someone asked this, it's like, so these things can be very important in future breeding projects because you're like, maybe it's just based on appearance. Like everyone is like gravitates toward this carrot that is this particular yellow, dark yellow instead of the orange one or something. And so they, just from the experience, they understand that and then they can move on with their breeding work and know that that is like a preference that consumers have. And then, but also like the question was the flavor wheel. The flavor wheel is also developed for a marketing tool. And the flavor wheel is not the end all be all. It's just the beginning of allowing you to like see some words. And I remember we were doing the flavor wheel for winter squash, and I kept tasting something. I said, I don't have the word for it. I don't know what it is, but it's similar to potato, but I'm not sure what it is. And then one of the winemakers said, underripe banana. And I was like, oh, that's what it is. And so it kind of just gets your brain working in this way to kind of start thinking like that, like as people that drink wine are very good at, but to be able to put words to what you're experiencing. And that is very good for a marketing tool to differentiate. Because if you ever worked at a farmer's market, and I have, and the farmers are growing, because I'm just the seller of the stuff, the farmer, you unload it and you're like, oh my gosh, we have, 10 different varieties of tomatoes here. And every single consumer is going to come up to you and go, so what's the difference in these? And so if we can give with the varieties like a description, or we have these words, this lexicon, then we can help our farmers to be able to differentiate them to consumers. So it's like, this is the one you want for the ultimate BLT. This is the one for the caprese salad. This is the one that you're going to want to cook. And because of these reasons, and it's because of and it comes up with descriptions that utilize these words, that we just need to get more used to using to describe what we're sensing when we're tasting things.
So when will this flavor wheel be available? And can we publish that on the Tomy website? Because that would be great, in case anybody does want to use it as a marketing tool or for your own taste testing.
Any minute. Um,
Okay.
Jordyn just gave me just the other day like the whole list of all the everything, and it's just like an artist puts the flavor wheel together, and they should have it back pretty soon. So we'll be able to put that up alongside. I can give you also the other one that a chef did. That's kind of like the next level, more complicated lexicon for folks, but that'll be out soon.
Yeah, we'll be putting that up on the Tomy website. And then also, Lorraine is working on a Tomy zine right now, or a tomato zine, which we're also going to be putting up as a PDF, so people can download it and print it out. You want to talk about that for a
Oh,
second,
sure.
Lorraine?
Yes. So
Yeah.
the zine, and there are quite a few zines that are on the Culinary Breeding Network website. I can put that URL up here in a moment. And that is kind of like for the public, it's something that's a PDF that you could easily, if you're having field days and it involves tomatoes, you could download it. You can print it out if you want. But it's a little bit of just general information that we think that people will be excited about learning more about tomatoes that maybe they're taking for granted, like center of origin and domestication education and how wild ones are different than domestic ones, and how plant breeders utilize wild species to help with disease resistance and create new varieties and actually more diversity than what we have in modern tomatoes. And so, anyway, there's a lot of information that's going to be in there. There is going to be about flavors and tastings, not really like how to do tastings, but just like a little bit about flavor um, in tomatoes. And then there is about a bit about the, what they're doing in Tomi and the problems that farmers have that the Tomi project is trying to address and create new varieties that have disease resistance but really taste great.
Yeah, we're going to be having another webinar on the 24th of March about the challenges of breeding tomatoes for both culinary qualities and for flavor, basically, and for disease resistant at the same time, because often it's not easy to get all of the perfect qualities that you want in one tomato. So please join us for that if you have time. It's on the 24th, and you can find the registration for that if you just Google webinars by eOrganic. So we have a couple more comments and questions coming in as well. So we had one question about whether or not you are evaluating other vegetables as well. I know Elaine is involved with a lot of different projects. She showed that slide in the beginning of the webinar about some of the other ones. I know she's working on a buckwheat project. You want to just talk about that a little bit more? Not
Yeah,
necessarily
sure.
buckwheat, but just the different ones you're
Yeah.
working on.
Oh yeah, I work on a value-added grains project, barley, buckwheat, this tomato one. We have one called Breaking Vegetable Boundaries out of Cornell. I will say that not all of them include doing these types of evaluations, though some of them do. But one thing I will say that is that the Variety Showcase is a big outreach event that a lot of the projects that I work on are featured at. And this year it's going to be happening in the Hudson Valley at Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming. And that is in Cold Spring, New York, and it's going to be on August 30th. So it is, if anybody is in that area or would want to travel there to see that, it is pretty amazing to be able to see all of these different research projects being featured at different tables, and paired with a chef or a baker that's focusing on, that's making something that you can taste that features that crop. So in that breeding work that the breeders are doing. And sometimes you do have this opportunity to taste things side by side, unreleased breeding lines that they're working on versus commercial varieties. And so it's kind of like part science fair for for the public. It's like part science fair and all of the great things that researchers are doing at land grant universities that's focused on organic. And also just like part like very fun, cool, hip food event. And so August 30th, it's a Sunday in the Hudson Valley.
So, thank you, Marissa. We have in the chat a comment from Marissa Nix, who works with Julie Dawson in Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin there. They do a lot of tomato breeding and trials. And so she put in a comment about how they do their tasting. They do 5 varieties and repeat one for a check, and they total 6 in a taste test for science people. And for public tests, they tend to just do overall ranking, and then they do a more in-depth survey if they're interested, which isn't so often. So thanks for that comment. Oh, I just had one more question that I want to ask before we end. Is there a genetic component to tomato flavor perception? I don't know if Jordyn has read anything about this, because some people have an aversion to tasting tomatoes. I personally don't like to eat too many raw tomatoes. There's something about that mushiness of the seeds and the acidity. It doesn't bother me too much when I just take out the seeds and use plum tomatoes. But have you read anything about that, Jordyn? Is there any kind of genetic component to tomato flavor perception?
Not that I have heard of, not it being genetic, but
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of our preferences of flavor are like culturally determined,
Mhm.
influenced by how we grew up. I
Yeah.
mean, there are some flavors that are genetically determined. I think cilantro is kind of
Yeah.
like the most popular one, where
Mhm.
like certain flavor notes do ring different to other people. But I mean, with there is an incredible amount of uh, genetic information that is dedicated to flavor. It is especially like in our nose, like our olfactory receptors, it is the largest gene family in the human genome. So there's like a ton of genetics going on with how we perceive aroma. But like preferences, it's I think more
Hmm.
culturally
Okay.
determined.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jordyn and Lane. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. And please join us on March 24th, if you can, for our next webinar on breeding tomatoes for both flavor and disease resistance.
Thank you.